This episode is dedicated to the memory of Caroline Eve Barclay, registered general nurse, born 24th of June 1954, died 5th of June 2021, a nurse from the age of 17. Those are the voices of our nurses outside Eastbourne District General Hospital this morning on the second day of their national strike. We know nurses as those that hold us as newborn babies, care for us when at our most vulnerable, and often hold us when we die, and then comfort those around us at our time of death. They have played a heroic role during the COVID-19 pandemic, and along with their other colleagues in the NHS, were awarded the George Cross on the 17th of July 2022 by the late Queen. Nurses do not normally strike. In fact, the RCN has never done so in its 102-year history. So what has brought us to this point? In this episode, we speak to nurses outside our hospital about what has motivated them to strike and what they hope to achieve by doing so. First up, we chat to Dawn, a nurse and a regional organiser for the RCN, about what is behind the strike action and issues such as recruitment and retention and why these matter so much. I've come down to Eastbourne District General Hospital to have a chat to some of the nurses on what might be termed a picket line, but it seems more like a sort of friendly bunch of people who would look after you, who are talking and making their point known. Why are nurses on strike, and what's your main objectives would you like to achieve?
Well, you said that this looks like a friendly bunch of people, and I think the fact is nurses are a friendly bunch of people. Nurses are good people that want to help people, want to do their jobs, and at the moment doing a good job is becoming increasingly hard because of the staffing shortages that are born as a result of the ongoing dispute around pay, which is impacting the amount of staff that we've got, which is having an impact on retention, which is having an impact on morale. Nobody wants to be here on these picket lines. I'm a nurse myself, and we're here in the freezing cold weather because we've got to get our point made that this cannot carry on and the government need to listen. Things need to change.
Thank you. And I was looking at, some of the statistics, I don't want to spend too much time talking statistics, but I think it was saying that the 1 in 9 nurses have actually left during this year, and there's about 47,000 vacancies currently, and even on a given day, using presumably agency and other cover, there's still 17,000 uncovered positions. So can you explain a little bit about what that actually means in terms of nursing care on the front line?
Well, the honest answer is nursing care on what people term as the front line is absolutely stretched. What we hear so often from our members is that people are not able to give the care that they aspire to give and want to give, and that is sad, tragic in fact. You mentioned agency nursing, high use of agency nurses and healthcare support workers. What we also see a lot of at the moment because of the staffing shortages is substantive staff doing extra shifts, bank shifts. That, in some respects, is very good. People have the opportunity to earn more money, but of course, at what cost? Are people getting enough downtime, enough rest? If they're working extra shifts, that can have a real impact on, potentially making mistakes, being tired, or people are then driving to and from work. All of these things we need to be taken into the picture.
Yes, thank you for that. And I think that's the point of concern, that it isn't about an individual pay dispute, though that's a very valid thing in a period of a cost of living crisis that we're in now. I looked at some figures that said that nurses' pay in real terms has declined 8% since 2010. And if you take the current situation where heating costs, despite the cap, have doubled since last year, food prices are running at 16%, housing and mortgage costs are going on, they're, an offer of 4.75%, which I think is what the government's put on the table, seems very inadequate given that loss of earnings over the last decade or so?
I think what we've got to think about, we hear all these media news reports, research that is saying nursing is one of the most trusted and respected professions. You can hear in the background all the tooting. Public are overwhelmingly supportive. I don't think there's any question about nurses being trusted, but I dare to ask the question, are nurses respected by members of the public? I think we as a profession are. By the government, I think at the moment we're not seeing respect shown. You've just highlighted all of those, what we call the daily costs of living. Isn't it shameful that we have got nurses that are working, can't afford to pay their rents, their mortgages, that are going to use the food bank? I'm not devaluing any other profession, but on a daily basis I speak to members who are telling me they're leaving the Royal College of Nursing because they're leaving nursing, because they're not going to continue their membership. When myself and my colleagues speak to these people about why they're leaving and what sectors they're going into, it amazes me that in other sectors people are earning more money than in this nursing sector. An example I would give you is we hear from a lot of healthcare support workers, they're earning more money working in a supermarket. I'm not devaluing anybody that works in a supermarket, that's great, but we have to ask ourselves, are we actually really paying people that work in the care industry fairly for the work that they do?
Thank you. And I think one of the things that I know may have affected, in particular Eastbourne, but I'm sure other health trusts as well, is that since leaving the EU, a number of EU nurses, doctors, frontline workers have actually left. And I know, because I did a Freedom of Information request a few years ago, that there are about 400 frontline staff who are EU citizens. I just wondered whether you've noticed, or whether colleagues have noticed, that more EU citizens have actually gone and have not been replaced.
Well, one of the things that makes the NHS so wonderful, and that's certainly the case locally, is people that work here from all over the world. That brings so many benefits and is absolutely wonderful. But, unfortunately, a lot of people that have come from overseas, they may be absolutely loving living in the local area, but, the fact that their wages are not keeping up in line with inflation, causing them problems on a daily basis, is actually starting to make people question, do they want to stay here? Can they afford to stay here? Would they be better off going back to where they came from? And sometimes what we're hearing is that's with a really heavy heart, because people would actually really like to stay. They perhaps enjoy, as I say, the local area, the work that they do, but actually they could go back home, as it were, and earn twice as much. Well, then almost people are saying to us, well, I'd be stupid not to take that opportunity.
Yes, thank you. And I know, this has been a problem over the decades, because my late wife, when she was working nursing, and we're talking now the early 1980s, there were problems then with nurses' pay and conditions, and there was a lot of recruitment from Australia, Canada, New Zealand, other countries, of UK nurses. And do you see that still happening at the moment? Are nurses being approached or recruited for English-speaking countries?
I think what we're seeing at the moment is the problem is not, well, there is a problem with recruitment, there's no question about it, but the problem is more on the retention line. Very often when we hear figures about X number of nurses have been recruited, that's great. The question we often step back and ask in the RCN is, perhaps a year later, after hearing an organisation has told us X number of nurses have been recruited, how many of them are still working there, or even perhaps working in this country? And that's the question. So the wider question about recruitment is about how people are treated, how people are made to feel, the pressure people are under. So recruitment is important, of course, but retention is the bigger issue. Getting people through the door is one thing, but how do we keep them there? And there's a lot of factors that link into that.
Yeah, thank you. And I think that's something that really needs to be borne in mind across the whole of the NHS. Well, so you've got 2 more days that have been announced, I think February the 6th and 7th.
That's correct, yes.
And I just wondered how you are coordinating or working with your colleagues who might not be on strike today, with NHS management, to make sure that service levels are provided on a priority basis.
So I think the first thing to say is we in the Royal College of Nursing the staff and the membership side are patient safety focused. There is no question about our dedication and commitment to that. So what we have been doing in the run up to the strike, so myself as one of the senior regional officers, we form what we call a strike committee, and that is officers like myself and local workplace reps working with senior trust management to actually look at what is considered safe staffing. Those areas that still need the emergency care going on, working on what we call derogation. So there are lots of nurses today that are working here in Eastbourne Hospital, likewise at the Conquest in Hastings, who are continuing to provide that patient care in solidarity with those that have walked out to get the message across. There's no question about delays being called to non-urgent outpatient appointments, longer wait times in A&E, elective surgery being cancelled, but we have got to get that message felt. But one thing I would say is, although this hospital is stretched today in terms of staffing because of the shortages, it is not unsafe. But while it is really, really stretched, that is what's happening every day. If you were to come here this time next week or the following week, this hospital will be stretched then. So we need to not be under any illusions that it's the strikes that are causing the problems of the staffing shortages and the sort of tightness around staffing. This is happening every single day.
Next we speak to Liz, a nurse since 1978, about what's compelling her to strike and how resolving this dispute to achieve adequate staffing levels is vital to our patients and our community. How long have you been a nurse?
About 45 years, maybe a bit more. Can't remember. 1978 I started.
Wow, that is a long time. And I know because the RCN has never been on strike, that you've never been on strike before. So what's motivated you to actually take this action today?
The thing that's really motivated me the most is the lack of staffing. We need to get safer staffing onto the wards. We've got so many vacancies because the people that would normally fill those vacancies can't afford to be employed as a nurse because the hourly rate's not high enough. So they've gone elsewhere to places that can pay them a decent rate. If we could attract them with a decent rate back into the hospital or into the nursing home, indeed, but same thing, we could get patients out of the wards into the nursing home. We could then free up space on the ward so the patients from A&E could get onto the wards, the patients from the ambulances could get into A&E, and the ambulance can go out to your sick mum who's on the floor in her house. That is the thing, breaks my heart, and that's the thing that I'm striking for.
Thank you. And I think it's really important. And what would you hope that the government will do in response to your strike action and the situation that the NHS is in the moment? I mean, I know the offer is 4.75%, but nurses' pay in real terms has gone down 8% since 2010. Cost of living, energy prices are twice what they were a year ago, despite the cap. Food inflation running at 16%, mortgages and rent costs going up. So, what do you think would be a reasonable outcome?
I'd like the government to actually trust us, to believe us when we say that we're doing it for safe staffing. Of course, money is important, and it's the way to attract people in. But actually, on the wards, and it is horrible for everybody. But it's not just the patients that are suffering; staff suffer as well because they can't provide the care they want to. They're spread so thin. Get nurses back into the wards, and we will provide the excellent care that is expected of us in the NHS.
Thanks very much, Liz. Thank you. Mike is a specialist nurse and gives his thoughts about minimum staffing levels and the current government approach to this dispute.
The legislation trying to push through by the government at the moment, the minimum staffing, we're already at minimum staffing. It's quite insulting for them to try and push this narrative as if they're trying to protect patients. We are already at a minimum. We're very grateful for the overseas nurses coming over to help us, but unfortunately it's hard to retain them. The NHS is a great place for experience for these nurses to then move on and get other careers elsewhere. So like I said, it's very hard to retain them on. If those overseas nurses were not here, the staffing would be absolutely dire. It already is, but without them it's painful to think what it would be. It's heartbreaking.
Thanks very much. Is there anything else you'd like to say?
Yeah, stand together. Power in numbers. Enough is enough. Solidarity.
Thank you very much. Thanks. Finally, we chat to Jill, a senior A&E nurse and a local RCN representative, about the situation here in Eastbourne and the support being received from colleagues not on strike and from the general public.
So I work at Eastbourne A&E, part of EST. I'm senior nurse there and educator of my RCN role. I'm here today, Picket supervisors, and making sure that the picket is safe and done lawfully, and making sure that it's a peaceful demonstration. But it's really great to hear all the honking, like you mentioned, and support from public has been fantastic. Thank you to all the public that donated gifts of food to us yesterday. It was fantastic, overwhelming with the support. My role with the RCN for East Sussex Healthcare Trust is I'm a representative, so I'm accredited trade union official, and I'm responsible for help supporting with the learning elements in regards to that. You have health and safety representatives and stewards that do the employment rights situations. The pay campaign and the safe staffing campaign that the RCN is running is different from employment rights generally, because obviously it's more central. So the discussion around pay and increase is very much linked to staffing levels, and that's linked then to patient care and patient safety. So I think that's the motivation for me. It's about patient safety and actually hashtag enough's enough.
Thank you. I think that's very clear. I mean, how would you characterise or describe the current situation regarding staffing level and service within the NHS or within the hospital, as much as you can talk about it?
So I think that the intent from everyone is to have really good staffing levels, and there's an ideal, and there's various tools that we can identify. We've got a patient's acuity of how sick they are, whether we've got a number of beds in an area, whether we've got the number of clinic appointments, and that would then have a ratio of what we need for the nursing staff, and also the medical staffing as well, and that's what's aimed for. Unfortunately, due to unprecedented workload, we have lots of people coming in using the services, particularly the unplanned services, so such as A&E. People do go to A&E, they are not able to or are unable to access for various reasons other services, and so that does put a demand on those areas that aren't able to say a certain number is the top off. So it's that things that has to be considered because of that acuity of patient and the amount of patients. Then obviously the staffing numbers aren't as quick to be responded to. The trust does really well with trying to work out where the safest approach is to the number of staff they have on any given day.
Thank you. That's really clear. And I mean, I think what comes over, excuse me, is the sense of the all continuing sense of responsibility and care. I think that's important. And in terms of your colleagues that are not striking at the present time, how do you, I mean, I would imagine that many of them, if not all, are sympathetic and understand the problems and the challenges. So how are you working with them, and how is the relationship?
So first of all, we need to be very clear that the people on the picket line are a small majority of those that voted in favour of the strike action with the Royal College of Nursing. East Sussex Healthcare reached the benchmark of having over 40% of their people to actually members to vote to strike, and over 50% of those that voted for strike action. But obviously we are nursing, at the centre of that is our care, and so therefore people that are working, looking after our patients, are actually supporting the strike activity because they're able to keep the patient services running. In fact, the RCN credit that we've got stickers that say, I'm supporting the strike by doing direct patient care. A fantastic support from the medical staff we've had out here, and our allied healthcare professionals has been great as well.
I mean, in terms of a strike day, how it affects a nurse personally is they lose their pay, but the NHS provides a strike payment of £50. Is that correct?
So slightly correct. So not only does the daily pay is something that is done without, the pension contribution for that day is also absent. So it is a real financial decision about doing that as well. And you mentioned about that £50. That's the Royal College of Nursing that will give the £50 to Royal College of Nursing members, and that's through an RCN Strike Fund that's dedicated for strike activity support members who in essence are financially hardship, people that are going to food banks. I'm sure people have mentioned that before, and I think it's really important to understand that why people might see that nursing is paid very well. There is different levels of nursing pay, and actually the fact is that people are on the breadline. Not acceptable.
No, and I think I've read a few times that approximately a quarter of healthcare trusts have set up food banks, in order to meet that need. Is there food bank here within East Sussex Healthcare Trust, or nurses? Do you know of nurses who use the food bank? I mean, obviously there's the Eastbourne Food Bank sites.
I am aware that people that work for East Sussex Healthcare Trust have used food banks that are publicly run, and they're often charities in their own right. And actually, colleagues of mine actually run food banks in locality areas, sort of Seaford way, I believe. So yeah, absolutely. But yeah, I do know people actually that have been using food banks. So that is a reality. That is not propaganda.
No, thank you very much. Thanks very much indeed. Thanks, Jill. Thank you for listening to this episode, and we hope that you've learned more about why this dedicated, professional and caring workforce feels compelled to take action. A few facts for you to consider. 57% of the public support the strike. That was in a poll conducted between the 11th and 13th of January. The average pay of an NHS nurse has fallen in real terms by 8% since 2010. 1 in 9 nurses, that's 40,365 in England, left active service in the year to June 2022. There are around 46,600 nursing vacancies in the NHS. They deserve our support.